This is an official and authorized translation of a FIGU publication. FIGU Bulletin number 28. May 2000. The near death of Semjase. For some weeks now, FIGU has its own English discussion forum in the internet. This discussion forum has found great interest in the meantime. In one of the many interesting discussions, someone asked a question as to what happened to Semjase on December 15, 1977. I answered him as follows: while Semjase was sitting in a locked room at the center discussing various matters with Billy, a person who knew that Semjase was in there sneaked to the door in order to hear her voice. When Semjase heard a light knocking at the door, she got excited and, while rising to her feet, she stumbled and fell with her head upon an electric stove and toward the wall. In falling, she pushed the button of her transmission device and vanished. Was beamed up into her ship, where she was laying on the floor for a longer time. When she didn't return to the station, Quetzal went searching for her and found her there in a deep coma. In addition to a broken arm, Semjase suffered a severe brain damage. The base of her skull was broken. On the flight back to Error, Quetzal tried to take the pressure away from her brain by applying a vacuum device. On Error, only seconds before she would have died, she was frozen. Later, with the help of a highly developed race from the DAL universe, she recovered. However, she had and still has to relearn her consciousness-related abilities again, a process that lasts some 70 years. Then, another person wrote the following posting: "This is the official story, however there have been serious questions about this and evaluations indicate the injuries are more consistent with a beating than with a fall. Particularly of interest is the way in which she could have fallen so as to break an arm and sustain injuries in the back of the head so severe as to drive shards of bone into the brain. An impact with the cement support for a stove seems unlikely. By the way, which arm was it? I cannot find the material in any references concerning that. I had asked you this before, but unfortunately the topics rise again. Others consulted generally do not want to consider the implications of the theory of it being a case of attempted murder and not an accident. Especially considering later developments, one definitely has serious concerns as to who at FIGU would have had the disposition to do it, especially the ability to sneak up on Iran without them becoming aware of it. Another thing in question is why there was no alarm given off by the beam ship when the vitals of Semjase were diminishing, and why such an extended period of time passed before the ship was located. With Tehran technology, such a scenario would be likely, but with Iran technology being used, it raises some questions. After 5 answers to that person's posting from 3 persons, and after Billy having been informed about the matter from the USA, I wrote my second reply: what are you aiming at with your confused and crazy posting regarding Semjase's accident? Of course your innuendo has nothing to do with the truth. The truth is that Semjase was sitting at the table. When she heard the sound from the door, she wanted to leave and stood up, but with one of her feet she was caught by the table leg, which was the reason why she fell upon the portable electric iron stove, which was damaged by her fall. Billy himself also jumped up, heard her faint cry and saw her head crashing against the wall just before she vanished. Obviously during her fall she had triggered the button of her transmitter device. Source: 95th contact of December 17, 1977. Unfortunately, Semjase didn't have the protection device with her on that contact, since she didn't intend to stay long at the center, and because she felt safe in that special location/room. The Pleiadians usually wear such a device in order that they may be warned and protected if a terrestrial person comes near them. Ah yes, Semjase broke her right arm. I think you are in danger of losing ground and reality beneath your feet. That's really a thing, a FIGU member trying to kill Semjase. If your innuendo would be true, the Pleiadians wouldn't have continued meeting with Billy. A question: is Randy Winters behind this scheme? When we informed Billy about your posting, he guessed that your crazy theory could be based on his untrue claim that since 1984 the Pleiadians don't visit with Billy anymore. For those interested, on February 3, 2000, Billy had his 279th official contact with Patar. Before closing, I will mention another argument from Billy. If the claim concerning a murder attempt by a FIGU member, that person is still a core group member, would be true, the Pleiadians/Pleiarans nowadays certainly wouldn't show themselves again above the center in order that core group members can see and even photograph their ships. Once again, one can only shake one's head about the confusing ideas some people can have. Christian Frenner, Switzerland. Hi Christian and Billy, thank you for the additional information. The theory is mine. I did ask Randy Winters several years ago about this, and his response was that he could not think of anyone at FIGU who would have the inclination or capability of carrying out such an act. He said if Billy ever did anything, it would have been that he made up the story just to cover up the idea that Semjase gave up on him. He had nothing derogatory to say about FIGU in this sense, and said that the repercussions of a murder in this case would be enormous, and thoughts that he would prefer not to deal with. Randy has nothing to do with this, and to my knowledge has never addressed the subject except to me. Best wishes, Anthony W. Sinner. You can post this if you want. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. Since 1903, anti-Semitic/neo-Nazi groups, organizations, individual fanatics and other types of circles antagonistic to Jews, have officially occupied themselves with the so-called Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is attributed to Jewish Zionist circles, respectively, Jewish/Zionist Learned Elders. Since then, again and again, it has given, and gives, cause for the persecution and hatred of Jews. Yet what actually conforms to the truth in regard to this? Said with few words, as the Pleiadians/Pleiaran explain, it deals with a monstrous work of lies, with an uncommonly evil falsification, respectively, a plagiarism emerging from earlier novels which came about after the middle of the 19th century. According to the Pleiadian/Pleiaran information, the top person in charge of the Russian Secret Service in Paris, Jorachowski, created the final version of the slanderous work in the years 1897 to 98, which was then first published in 1903 in Russia in the newspaper Le Ban, with the mendacious assertion that it was genuine. However, its actual distribution first occurred in the year 1919, and indeed quite explosively at the hands of the Russian opponents of the 1917 revolution. Thereby, with the publication of the alleged protocols, undoubtedly the intention existed to form antisemitism into a weapon against Bolshevism. They were then taken over in Nazi Germany, brought in and introduced by Fyodor Winberg, a Ukrainian officer and fighter against the Russian Revolution, who was living in German exile. The slanderous work is still in circulation today and further causes further racial damage, whereby it is asserted that the Jews had created a secret world government and hoarded all the gold, and that the Jewish people are to blame for wars and political as well as commercial crises, and so forth. Such defamatory assertions exist in many kinds of variations, which naturally represent a godsend for anti-Semitic/Nazi circles and other extreme right racist circles. The two following versions of nonsense assertions from the alleged protocols may serve as an example. Quote 9. The function of war. 3.3. In order to induce the power-hungry to a misuse of power, we will bring all forces in opposition one to another. 7.2. Throughout all Europe, and by means of relations with Europe, in other continents also, we must create ferments, discords and hostility. 7.3. We must be in a position to respond to every act of opposition by war with the neighbors of that country which dares to oppose us, but if these neighbors should also venture to stand collectively together against us, then we must offer resistance by a world war. Or quote 12. Death 9. Death is the inevitable end for all. Therefore, it is better to bring that end nearer to those who stand in the way of our goals. These days, all governments and high government persons as well as all banks and their bosses, primarily the Rothschilds as well as commercial magnates, and so forth, become, through the anti-Semitic/neo-Nazi circles and extreme right circles, worked into in the slanderous machinations in order to stir up hate especially against the Jewish world and their alleged world government. In the Nazi era the anti-Semitic inflammatory text, with hooray bellowing, was especially distributed by the Nazis, and indeed not only in Germany, rather also everywhere where Nazis were active in other countries. In Switzerland these were the Frontler, lit. Those on the front, who brought the mendacious protocols into circulation as Adolf Hitler finally seized power in Germany in the spring of 1933. That gave the Jewish organizations in Switzerland an opportunity to make a legal move against the slanderous protocols, and namely in the Bern Magistrates Court. The process unleashed worldwide attention, and it was made clear that the alleged protocols were a forgery, respectively, a work of lies. Unfortunately, several years later, the judgment was trivialized again in the High Court and, as it were, repealed, whereby the lies and slander against the Jews resurfaced. They are nothing other than lies, deceit and swindle in a form which is truly a crime against peoples. They are a monstrously defamatory poor piece of work of irresponsible, criminal anti-Semites, an evil, people's denigrating and genocidal poor piece of work with which Adolf Hitler and his mermens also occupied themselves, and which contributed uncommonly much to Hitler's Nazi Reich, being responsible for millions of innocent Jews and also people of different races and different beliefs, men, women and children, being tormented, tortured and handed over for gruesome deaths. For those interested, the following book is worth reading: Die Protokoll der Weisen von Zion, by Jeffrey L. Sammons, Wallstein Verlag. This is an unofficial but authorized translation of a FIGU publication. Pages 9-10. Reader's question. Now a question of morality: is it really right, always and really always, to tell the truth, even if one knows, in a certain situation, that a selfless lie could prevent suffering and thereby would actually only have advantages? The philosopher Immanuel Kant cites, as an example of his categorical imperative, the following case: a man pursued by a murderer seeks protection with a neighbor and hides in his house. Now, were the neighbor asked by the murderer whether he hid the man he seeks in his house, then he must tell the truth and hand the defenseless man over to the murderer. In order not to break the law, he must, in every case, tell the truth, as it is also expected by his fellow humans. What is to be made of this, and what do the creational laws say about it? Netherlands/Germany. Billy answer. Immanuel Kant's uncompromising stance, that a concealment of something is designated a lie or an evasive lie, which is also advocated by various other philosophers, is, in the framework of this reference, not correct. Therefore when, in the aforementioned example by Kant, the presence of the one sought by the murderer is concealed by the neighbor, then that has nothing to do with the lie or an evasive lie, rather solely and alone with the fact's concealment, which results due to reasons of conscience and for the protection of the life of another human being. A lie or an evasive lie is something completely different to a concealment of a fact. There can be no argument about that, not even if all the philosophers in the world oppose it by screaming blue murder and running amok. A lie or an evasive lie is, in every case, a conscious untrue deception and statement for the purpose of one's own well-being and profit, and so forth. A lie or evasive lie is, and therefore always remains, a deliberate distortion of the truth for one's own advantage, and indeed also in regard to feelings and emotions. Lies and evasive lies are a twisting of the facts, as well as intentional ambiguities, vagueness and hypocrisy, for the sake of one's own advantage in any kind of form. Lies and evasive lies are, therefore, something false, which originate from a craving for recognition, from angst, cowardice, revenge, hate or false love, and so forth. In any kind of form, also in regard to morality, lies and evasive lies are always an end in themselves and egoistic. From this the human thus avoids himself and adopts unworthy behavior. To conceal something does not count as a lie nor as an evasive lie, whereby the evasive lie is just as strictly delineated as is the actual lie. A concealment is based on a fact which could be communicated, about which, nevertheless, one remains silent, which, for example, can certainly be done for reasons of conscience or for the protection of one's self or another person. Through the concealment, which in no way can be equated with a lie or an evasive lie, the actual facts of a matter can therefore be concealed. How that appears in a particular case always is dictated by the situation, which certainly may be clear. Yet it is certain that a concealment, respectively, remaining silent, has nothing to do with a lie or an evasive lie, which in each case always, in some form or other, relate to things which are ends in themselves. Concealment of, or remaining silent about, facts are, nevertheless, always and without exception a question of conscience, which can only be resolved through clear reason and in compliance with the related laws. This is the viewpoint of the spiritual teaching, which, as is apparent, is not compatible with the stated views of terrestrial philosophers, who, in their thinking as well as their expositions and explanations, are able to speak and philosophize in a way pertaining to purely material intellectual rationality. This is an official and authorized translation of a FIGU publication. FIGU Bulletin number 28. May 2000. The near death of Semjase. For some weeks now FIGU has its own English discussion forum in the internet. This discussion forum has found great interest in the meantime. In one of the many interesting discussions someone asked a question as to what happened to Semjase on December 15, 1977. I answered him as follows: while Semjase was sitting in a locked room at the center discussing various matters with Billy, a person who knew that Semjase was in there sneaked to the door in order to hear her voice. When Semjase heard a light knocking at the door, she got excited and, while rising to her feet, she stumbled and fell with her head upon an electric stove and toward the wall. In falling she pushed the button of her transmission device and vanished as was beamed up into her ship, where she was laying on the floor for a longer time. When she didn't return to the station, Quetzal went searching for her and found her there in a deep coma. In addition to a broken arm, Semjase suffered a severe brain damage. The base of her skull was broken. On the flight back to Error, Quetzal tried to take the pressure away from her brain by applying a vacuum device. On Error, only seconds before she would have died, she was frozen. Later, with the help of a highly developed race from the DAL universe, she recovered. However, she had and still has to relearn her consciousness-related abilities again, a process that lasts some 70 years. Then, another person wrote the following posting: this is the official story, however there have been serious questions about this and evaluations indicate the injuries are more consistent with a